Good afternoon. My name is Michael Vasquez, and I'll be talking about American slavery. It's March 22nd, 2026. A little background on Frederick Douglass and Solomon Northup. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery. He was mixed with white and black. His mother was black, and his dad was a white slave owner, believed to be a slave owner at the time. He was enslaved because at the time, the mother's status, whether she was free or enslaved, determined mostly on if the son or daughter was going to be enslaved. For example, if the mother was enslaved, then the kids were going to be enslaved, and if the mother was free, the kids were going to be free. His mother was sold when he was an infant and died a few years later, though he did not care for her more than a stranger dying. He wrote about how cruel some of the slaveholders were, and how one of them would whip his aunt until she was covered in blood. Next, Solomon Northup. Solomon Northup was a free man born in the North. He was captured by men who kidnapped and sold black people into slave markets. He tried to tell people that he was not a slave, but no one believed him. In his writings, he gave insight into how slavery was. He was enslaved by a man who used black people as props to show off. Some things that slaves would do were playing music, like the little boy that would play the violin for the white guests. Eventually, Solomon and the little boy became friends, and the little boy got Solomon to actually play the violin. My primary sources was Frederick Douglass bibliography or autobiography, and Solomon Northup's book 12 Years a Slave. Firstly, Frederick Douglass was a man born in slavery and later wrote about his experience while being a slave. His father was believed to be the slave master, but he never knew his actual father because his mother died it's a typo right here. His mother died when he was a little bit older, but she was not around after he left infancy. He never knew his real age because of his owners did not keep track of his birth records. Solomon Northup was a free man, and he was kidnapped as a grown man and taken to the south to be a slave. He was later freed when someone from his old life found him and took him home into the North. Quotes. Alright, firstly, from 12 Years a Slave, "Don't cry, mama. I will be a good boy. Don't cry," said Randall, looking back as they passed out of the door. "What has become of the lad? God knows it was a mournful scene indeed. I would have cried if I had dared." In this quote, Frederick Douglass highlights a family being departed from each other. Next, Frederick Douglass. "Must stand by and see one white son tie up his brother out of but few shades darker complexion than himself, and they play the gory lash to his naked back." In this quote, he is pointing out how it was okay at the time for half brothers to beat their brother into bleeding because they were not fully white. I'm sure he used this example because he most likely had a few fully white brothers or sisters that obviously had a lot more privilege than him. Also, earlier in the autobiography, Frederick Douglass mentions the white children would know their birthday, but Frederick Douglass didn't have the privilege of knowing his birthday or knowing how old he was. He would just count his age from the springs and falls and winters that would pass. Alright, some comparison between Douglass and Solomon. Alright. Race of Douglass, race, gender, status. Douglass was mixed. He was black and white, and he was a male, and he was a slave and then freed. Solomon, he was a black male. He was free and then slave, and then enslaved and then free again. Alright. And this is something I kind of came up with, but their trauma. Douglass and Solomon, they both had a lot of trauma. Douglass seen his aunt beat almost to death, and Solomon was stolen from his family and sold into slavery. Both of these men had very deep trauma with their family. That's my bibliography. And my final question is some final questions and reflections that I wanted to add and go over were the major reflection on how Frederick Douglass and Solomon mentioned how brutal and heavy it was to be a slave. They would have to endure a lot. Thinking back to the time, you would think they were sort of used to it since it was so popular back then, but obviously from their writings they understand how cruel it was, and even a lot of the white people understood how cruel it was. Another moment that I wanted to highlight was that Frederick Douglass had to fight to get out of slavery, and he knew that he was meant for more than slavery. He was a very smart man and became literate even when society didn't see it as normal and saw him as stupid. Another point that I want to reflect on is how cruel slavery was back then, and how money hungry people were back then. Some of the white people were so down bad to get money that they would go to the north to steal grown men to take advantage of them and to sell them into the slave market, which only benefited them, and this completely ruined the lives of black men and women at the time. Lastly, a question that I have is, why did slaveholders see education so bad for black people that they had to completely abstain from teaching them any form of knowledge? I've heard of quote that said knowledge is power, but how in this day and age where we call like warehouse working and minimum wage working modern slavery, how could we use knowledge to give ourselves power? That will be it for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.